Okay, this is going to be our next part of the 20th New York State Militia, and we're going to trace the march of the 20th New York State Militia into the state of Pennsylvania. And in front of us in the camera right now, we left off just right over here on our last video, where today the Highway 15 runs. In 1863, of course, there wasn't a superhighway like there is today. So we're going to follow their route of march as they're leaving Emmitsburg and going into the town, and the state, rather, of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. In 1863, as they would have crossed that highway, they would have ended up again on the Emmitsburg Pike heading into the state of Pennsylvania. This cemetery here on the right is the Emmitsburg Presbyterian Cemetery, which was established in the year 1730. So of course, these soldiers of the 1st Corps with the 20th New York State Militia in March would have left a burning town of Emmitsburg, which had just caught on fire, and now passed a cemetery. Very odd and strange reminders of what would be to come over the next 3 days at Gettysburg. Now, as we head up the Emmitsburg Road here, there may be times I don't have a lot to say because it's just a road. There's not a lot of original structures. But I do want to point that these New York soldiers at this point will be crossing the Mason-Dixon line into Pennsylvania. They will be marching with the 151st, the 121st, and the 142nd Pennsylvania regiments now entering their home state. It is said that when many soldiers crossed from Maryland into Pennsylvania, their bands began to strike up anthems, Home Sweet Home being one of the anthems. Just up here on the right, you'll see on the right-hand side the Welcome to Pennsylvania sign right here on the right. At this point, these soldiers are now on northern soil here on the Emmitsburg Pike. These guys are marching along with the entire 1st Corps and Biddle's Brigade, which consisted of the 20th New York State Militia, the 121st Pennsylvania Volunteers, the 142nd Pennsylvania Volunteers, the 151st Pennsylvania Volunteers, and Captain James B. Cooper's 1st Pennsylvania Light Artillery Battery B are now crossing Middle Creek and heading right to Emmitsburg. Now, just up the road here, about 1 mile, is where the intersection of the Bullfrog Road and the historic Moritz or Mertz Tavern was. And that is where John Reynolds establishes his headquarters on June the 30th, 1863, as these soldiers march into the town of Gettysburg. Now, as we looked at in other video series, the 1st Corps would continue straight as we're driving today and head all the way into Emmitsburg, up the Emmitsburg Pike. The Reynolds and his staff, rather, would go into the town and take a slightly different route through the town of Gettysburg to the west side and over toward the Lutheran Seminary. But one brigade under Colonel Chapman Biddle, who was of the 121st Pennsylvania, was promoted to the brigade commander, would actually be placed on picket duty. We're going to talk about that on our next video at the Mertz Tavern, the Moritz Tavern, which is just up here on the right-hand side. It's a large brick structure. That is where we will stop and take over in our next video. And as we round this corner, you'll see the Moritz Tavern, the Mertz Tavern here on the right, the brick structure, today next to Keystone Fireworks here in Gettysburg. This has been our next part of the 20th New York State Militia at Gettysburg on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Okay, this is going to be our next part in our video series, the 20th New York State Militia at Gettysburg. And I'm standing here at the Moritz Tavern. And also it's been pointed out to me that this is once called the Mertz, or pronounced the Mertz Tavern. On a different map, I believe it was called the Hotchkiss map. But this tavern, we've already done a video series on it as far as its history. Today we're going to talk about it with the 1st Corps, John Reynolds, and the 20th New York State Militia of Biddle's Brigade. Now, Reynolds established his command here at the intersection of the Emmitsburg Pike and the Bullfrog Road. The Bullfrog Road is right there where you see that car coming from. And of course, this is the Emmitsburg Road here that goes north to south. And in 1863, the Bullfrog Road actually ran right by the Mertz Tavern in this direction and then headed down into Maryland. Of course, that road was taken out as Modern 15 was put in. Reynolds established his command here at this intersection at this tavern on June the 30th, 1863, and he would spend the last evening of his life in the summer kitchen behind the tavern. Now, the 20th New York State Militia soldiers of the Ulster Guard were assigned to the 1st Brigade, and they were on picket duty 1.5 miles from this tavern down the Bullfrog Road in the direction our camera is focused on. And that was at the intersection that was locally known at that time as Ross White's Crossroads. The 1st Brigade on the night of June 30th left this area here and headed in that direction, being led by Colonel Chapman Biddle of the 121st Pennsylvania. He would later become the brigade commander. And in our next video part, we're actually going to ride in my car, and we're going to take the route of march from the Mertz Tavern to Ross White's Crossroads, and we're going to see some of the houses and the buildings that the soldiers from the 20th New York State Militia may have seen and passed by, or had seen and passed by, on the evening of June 30th, 1863, rather. This has been our next part in our series, 20th New York State Militia at Gettysburg, on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Okay, we're here at the parking lot of the Mertz Tavern at the intersection of Bullfrog and Emmitsburg Road. And in our next video part, we are going to actually do the route of march of Colonel Chapman Biddle's brigade. Now, of course, as you look to our right, the Emmitsburg Road goes into Gettysburg. That's where the 1st Corps, or the overwhelming majority of the 1st Corps went. But Biddle's brigade, which the 20th New York State Militia was in, was sent on picket duty here to the west. As you see this log house on the left coming up, that was the David Sheets farm at that time. Today it's called The Farm. It was built in the year of 1790 with a large red Pennsylvania bank barn. So these soldiers of Biddle's brigade, the 20th New York State Militia, are now marching westbound here on the Bullfrog Road. And as we follow their route of march, I'm going to point out a structure or two that were here during the Battle of Gettysburg. Now again, this brigade is on picket duty. The battle has not yet started. The entire 1st Corps is heading up into the town of Gettysburg on the Emmitsburg Pike. Reynolds is heading that way, but these guys are posted here just to the west on picket duty to watch out for Confederate troops. This is a very not well known about and not used road today, Bullfrog Road, probably due to the destruction of it being the Pittsburgh-Baltimore Turnpike when Modern 15 was put in and expanded to 4 lanes in the late 1960s. It's a very windy road, and it ends up at a major crossroad. And at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, that was known as Ross White's Crossroads. And that's where we're headed next, and we'll take up on our next part. One of the farms that we're going to pass up here was the house and farm of Rudolph Sarbaugh, the brick structure, and you can see it right dead in front of us right now. It's a brick house. On the right-hand side is the bank barn. The house was built in 1797, the barn in the early 1800s. The extension on the house, the wood and yellow extension, was put in the year after the Battle of Gettysburg. And I did on the Sarbaugh farm that you can go back and watch. But this would have been a structure that the men of the 20th New York State Militia would have passed as they were headed here on the Bullfrog Road to Ross White's Crossroads on the evening of June the 30th, 1863. When they arrive up here at the Crossroads, I can only imagine in my mind at this time overnight into July 1st what these soldiers are now thinking. And when they would encamp and then wake up the very next morning of July 1st and begin to hear artillery in the distance as the Battle of Gettysburg unfolds, what must have been going through their minds. When you go up to this intersection, you come to a spot on a hill where you can actually look toward the east and you can see both of the round tops. And it is just very ironic that some of the most major fighting in the American Civil War would happen at places like Devil's Den, Little Round Top, the Slaughter Pen, the Wheat Field, the Rose Farm, and other names that are always going to be associated with the Battle of Gettysburg on July 2nd, 1863. And right up here is Ross White's Crossroads of 1863. Today it's the intersection of Bullfrog and Pumping Station Road, but back then it was called the Millerstown Road. And this stop sign here is Ross White's Crossroads. We're going to stop here and we will pick this up in our next video here. The 20th New York State Militia at Gettysburg on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Okay, this is the 20th New York State Militia at Gettysburg, and here at our next part, we're here at Ross White's Crossroads. It is July 1st of 1863, and in the distance, if you look at the camera here on the right-hand side, you can see both Little and Big Round Top from this hill. This is actually the hill on my left of the Alexander Woods Farm, which is one of the farms that the 20th New York State Militia passed by. At 8 a.m. on July 1st, 1863, Chapman Biddle is ordered to make his way toward Gettysburg, and he would take the Millerstown Road. His regiments he had under his command was the 20th New York State Militia, the 142nd Pennsylvania Volunteers, the 151st Pennsylvania, the 121st Pennsylvania, and the 1st Pennsylvania Light Artillery Battery B. On the left, in the distance over here, you can actually see the Alexander Woods Farm, which was there in 1863. With their clothes still wet from bathing, the 20th New York State Militia began their march past orchards and meadows, fields of grain, fences and farmhouses, which included large Pennsylvania bank barns. And many soldiers remembered seeing during their marches these enormous Pennsylvania bank barns, which we are famous for in Pennsylvania. In this area, a 22-year-old private, Alexander Tice, remarked to one of his friends, Enos Vale. He said to him, "You know, I have never been in a battle, and I have a premonition that I am to be killed." Now, Vale replied to him, probably trying to lift his spirits a little bit, but he replied to him that he had rather been in every battle up to this point and survived. So he was probably trying to boost his morale a bit. After traveling 2.9 miles, they would turn sharply to the right. Now, during their travels, it's said that women would come from some of the farms and bring out baked bread, fresh water, and one of the farms that most likely that happened is coming up here in front of us, and we're going to take a look at that farm in our next video part. But this has been our next part in our journey in our video series, the 20th New York State Militia at Gettysburg on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook.